The St. John of Damascus Orthodox Educational Initiative presents the Damascene Podcast.
Saint from the Syrian on the Lord, section 42. For by that wherein thou knewest, O Pharisee, that our Lord was not a prophet, by that very thing it was proved that thou didst not know the prophets. For by this thou saidst, had this man been a prophet, he would have known. Thou showest herein that in thy esteem whoever is a prophet knows all things. But lo, some matters were hidden from the prophets. How then dost thou attribute the revelation of all hidden things to the prophets? But this unwise teacher who perverted the scriptures of the prophets did not even understand what he read in the scriptures. For it was not only that the greatness of the Lord was not discerned by that Pharisee, but he did not even discern the weakness of the prophets. For our Lord, as knowing all things, allowed that sinful woman to come in and receive his peace. But Elisha, as one ignorant, said to the Shunammite, Peace be to thee, and peace to the child. Accordingly, he who supposed that our Lord was proved not to be a prophet, was himself proved not to know the prophets. When the mind contains malice and cannot refrain, then that malice which is in it is cunning in finding a pretext for opening a door. But in case that pretext in which the deceiver takes refuge is confuted, he knows that within this there is another concealed which he may employ. Now observe this son of Israel, how he was like Israel in his stubbornness. For heathenism was bound up in the mind of the people. Therefore Moses was taken away from them, that the wickedness that was within them might become manifest, but that they might not be put to shame, and that it might not be known how they were seeking idols. They first sought for Moses, and then for idols. As for this Moses, we know not what has become of him, they said. And if God, who cannot die, brought thee out of Egypt, why dost thou seek for a man who at some time must die? Yet they did not desire Moses, that he should become a god to them, because Moses could hear and see and reprove. But they sought for a God, who could neither hear nor see nor reprove. But whensoever Moses shall have died, what shall remain of him? For behold, thy God is a living God, and lo, he has revealed himself to thee by living testimonies. For the bright cloud was at that time overshadowing them, and they had the pillar of light in the night time. Water flowed for them from the rock, and they drank its streams. They were delighted every day by tasting that manna, the fame of which we have heard. How was Moses far from thee? Behold, the signs of Moses surround thee. Or how does the person of Moses profit thee, when thou hast such a guide as this? If thy garments wear not old, and a temperate air refreshes thee, if the heat and the cold do not hurt thee, and thou hast rest from war, and art far removed from the fear of Egypt, what thing then was lacking to Israel that he sought for Moses? Open heathenism was lacking to him. For it was not for Moses that he sought, but on the pretext of Moses' absence he followed after the calf. Thus briefly have we showed that when the mind is full of anything, but an opposing reason meets it, then it forces it by violence to open for it a door to that which it desires. Section 43. Thou too, O Pharisee, athirst for blasphemy, what sawest thou in our Lord to show that he was not a prophet? For lo, the things that belonged to the Lord of the prophets were seen in him. For the gushing tears made haste to proclaim that they were shed as before God. The sorrowing kisses testified that they sought to win over the creditor to tear up the debt bonds. The goodly ointment of the sinful woman proclaimed that it was a bribe of penitence. These medicines the sinful woman offered to her physician, that by her tears he might wash away her stains, by her kisses he might heal her wounds, by her sweet ointment he might make her evil name sweet as the odor of her ointment. This is the physician who heals men by the medicines which they bring to him. These marvels were shown at that time, but to the Pharisee instead of these there appeared blasphemy. For what could be established in the weeping of the sinful woman but that he can justify sinners? Else Judge thou in thy mind, O blind teacher, why was that mournful weeping in the joyful feast, so that while they were making merry with food, she was in bitterness with her tears? Because she was a sinner, her deeds were unchaste, and these deeds she was wont to do. But if at that time, from the wantonness of sinners, she was turned to chastity, then acknowledge, thou who saidst, he is not a prophet, that he is one who makes those chaste that have been wanton. For by this, that thou knowest that she is a sinner, and by this, that thou seest her now penitent, search out where is the power that changed her. For he ought to have fallen down and worshipped him, who, while silent, in his silence turned to chastity those sinners whom the prophets by their vehement utterances could not turn to chastity. A wonderful and marvelous thing was seen in the house of the Pharisee, a sinful woman that sat and wept, and she who wept said not wherefore she wept, nor did he at whose feet she sat say to her, Why weepest thou? The sinner did not need with her lips to petition our Lord, because she believed that he knew, as God, the petitions that were hidden in her tears. Nor did our Lord ask her, What hast thou done? For she knew that by her pure kisses she was atoning for her transgressions. So then she, because she believed that he knew the things that were hidden, offered to him her prayers in her heart. For knowing secret things, he had no need of the outward lips. If then the sinner, because she knew that our Lord was God, sought not to persuade him with her lips, and our Lord, because as God he discerned her thoughts, therefore questioned her not, dost not thou, O tyrant Pharisee, from the silence of both understand the position of both, that she was praying as to God in her heart, and that he as God was in silence searching out her thoughts? But the Pharisee could not see and understand these things, because he was a son of Israel, who though perceiving saw not, and though he heard understood not. Though then our Lord knew that Pharisee thought evil thoughts concerning him, he confuted him gently and not harshly. For sweetness came down from on high to break down the bitterness with which the evil one had stamped us. Therefore our Lord taught that Pharisee of himself and in himself, as though saying, Even as I, though I knew the evil things in thy heart, yet gently persuaded thee, so though I knew the evil things of this woman, I mercifully received her. But let us hear how long-suffering was drawn after the hasty thought, so as to draw it from haste to understanding. A certain creditor had 2 debtors, our Lord says. One owed 500 dinars, and the other 50 dinars. Be not wearied, O hearer, at the length of the repetition of the parable, lest thou be contrary to him who in the parable was long-suffering for the sake of giving help. At length, when neither of them had wherewithal to pay, he forgave them both. Which of them dost thou think would love him more? Simon said to him, I suppose that he, to whom more was forgiven. Our Lord said to him, Thou hast rightly judged. Our Lord in his justice commended the perverse Pharisee because of the right judgment which he had judged, though he in his wickedness had answered the good Lord concerning the mercy he had wrought. Now many things are laid up in this parable, for it is a treasury full of many helps. Why then did our Lord require that the Pharisee should pass judgment for him between the 2 debtors? Was it not that the greatness coming after the littleness might show itself that nothing of the littleness was drawn after the greatness? For our Lord, since he knew the secret things, was long-suffering, and questioned Simon, that those might be put to shame, who, though not knowing, were hasty to blame, but not to enquire. For if, O man, before I heard thy judgment passed, I judged not of it, why didst thou, before thou heardest from me the case of the sinful woman, hastily blame? Now this was done for our instruction, that we might be swift to enquire, but slow to pass our sentence. For had that Pharisee been long-suffering, lo, that pardon which our Lord in the end gave to the sinful woman would have taught him everything. Long-suffering is wont to acquire all things for those that acquire it. Section 44. But again, through the forgiveness of the 2 debtors, our Lord led into forgiveness him who was in need of forgiveness. yet in whose eyes the forgiveness of debts was hateful. For though the debts of the Pharisee himself needed forgiveness, yet the forgiveness of the debts of the sinful woman was hateful in his eyes. For had there been this forgiveness of debts in the mind of the Pharisee, it would not have been in his eyes disgraceful that that sinful woman should have come for forgiveness of her debts to God and not to the priests. For the priests could not forgive sins such as those. But this sinful woman, from the glorious works which our Lord did, believed that he could also forgive sins. For she knew that whoso is able to restore the members of the body is able also to cleanse away the spots of the soul. But the Pharisee, though he was a teacher, did not know this. For the teachers of Israel were wont to be fools, put to shame by the despised and vile. For they were put to shame by that blind man, to whom they said, We know that this man is a sinner. But he said to them, How did he open my eyes? Lo, God hears not sinners. These are the blind teachers who were made guides to others, and their perverse path was made straight by a blind man. Section 45. But hear ye the marvel that our Lord wrought, because that Pharisee supposed that our Lord did not know that the woman who touched him was a sinner. Our Lord made the lips of the Pharisee like the strings of a harp, and by his very lips he sang how she was trampling underfoot his sins, though he knew it not. And he who, as though he knew, had blamed, was found to be a harp, whereto another could sing of that which he knew. For our Lord compared the sins of the sinful woman to 500 dinars, and caused them to pass into the hearing of the Pharisee by the parable which he heard. And again brought them forth from his mouth in the judgment he gave, though Simon knew not, when he was judging, that those 500 dinars denoted the sins of the sinful woman. And the Pharisee, who thought concerning our Lord that he had not knowledge of her sins, was himself found not to have knowledge of them, when he heard of those debts in the parable, and gave judgment concerning them with his voice. But when it was explained to him at last by our Lord, then the Pharisee knew that alike his ears and also his lips were, as it were, instruments for our Lord, through which he might sing the glories of his knowledge. For this Pharisee was the fellow of those scribes, whose sentence by their own mouths our Lord gave against them. What then will the Lord of the vineyard do to those husbandmen? They say unto him, Against themselves. He will terribly destroy them, and will hire out the vineyard to husbandmen, who will render unto him the fruit in its season. This is the Godhead, to which all things are easy, which by the very mouths that blasphemed it, pronounced the sentence of those very mouths against them. Section 46. Glory then be to him the invisible, who clothed himself in invisibility, that sinners might be able to draw near to him. For our Lord did not repel the sinful woman as the Pharisee expected, inasmuch as he descended from the height which no man can reach unto, altogether in order that lowly publicans like Zacchaeus might reach unto him. And the nature which none can handle clothed itself in a body, altogether in order that all lips might kiss his feet as the sinful woman did. For the sacred soul was hidden within the veil of flesh, and so touched all unclean lips, and sanctified them. Thus he whom his appetite was supposed to invite to feasting, his feet invited to tears. He was the good physician, who came forth to go to the sinful woman who was seeking him in her soul. She then anointed the feet of our Lord, who anointed not his head, she who was trodden down in the dust by all. For those Pharisees, who justified themselves and despised all else, trod her down. But he, the merciful, whose pure body sanctified her uncleanness, had pity on her. Section 47. But Mary anointed the head of our Lord's body, as a token of the better part which she had chosen. And Christ prophesied concerning that which her soul had chosen. While Martha was cumbered with serving, Mary was hungering to be satisfied with spiritual things by him who also satisfies us with bodily things. So Mary refreshed him with precious ointment, as he had refreshed her with his exalted teaching. Mary by the oil showed forth the mystery of his mortality, who by his teaching mortified the concupiscence of her flesh. Thus the sinful woman, by the flood of her tears, in full assurance, was rewarded with remission of sins from beside his feet. And she who had the issue of blood stole healing from the hem of his garment. But Mary received blessing openly from his mouth, as a reward of the service of her hands upon his head. For she poured out on his head the precious ointment, and received from his mouth a wonderful promise. This is the ointment which was sown above and yielded fruit below. For she sowed it on his head, and gathered its fruit from between his lips. She shall have a name, and this memorial in every place where my gospel shall be preached. Accordingly, what she then received of him, he is able to cause to pass on to all generations, and in no generation can any hinder it. For the ointment which she poured upon his head gave its odor in presence of all the guests, and refreshed him. So also the goodly name which he gave her passes down through all generations, and brings honor to her. Even as all who were at the feast were sensible of her ointment, it was meet that all who come into the world should be sensible of her triumph. This is a loan whereof the increase is exacted in all generations. Section 48. Now Simeon the priest, when he took him up in his arms to present him before God, understood as he saw him that he was not presenting him, but was being himself presented. For the son was not presented by the servant to his father, but the servant was presented by the son to his Lord. For it is not possible that he, by whom every offering is presented, should be presented by another. For the offering does not present him that offers it, but by them that offer are offerings presented. So then he who receives offerings gave himself to be offered by another, that those who presented him, while offering him, might themselves be presented by him. For as he gave his body to be eaten, that when eaten it might quicken to life them that ate him, so he gave himself to be offered, that by his cross the hands of them that offered him might be sanctified. So then, though the arms of Simeon seemed to be presenting the Son, yet the words of Simeon testified that he was presented by the Son. Therefore we can have no dispute concerning this, because that which was said put an end to dispute. Now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace. He then who is let depart to go in peace to God is presented as an offering to God, and in order to make known by whom he was presented, he said, Lo, mine eyes have seen thy mercy. If there was no grace wrought on him, why then did he give thanks? But rightly did he give thanks, that he was thought worthy to receive in his arms him whom angels and prophets greatly desired to see. For lo, mine eyes have seen thy mercy. Let us understand then and see. Is mercy that which shows mercy to another, or is it that which receives mercy from another? But if mercy is that which shows mercy to all, well did Simeon call our Lord by the name of the mercy that showed mercy to him. Him who freed him from the world which is full of snares, that he might go to Eden which is full of pleasures. For he who was priest said and testified that he was offered as an offering, that from the midst of the perishing world he should go and be stored up in the treasure house which is kept safe. For one, for whom it may be that what he has found should be lost, to him it belongs to be diligent that it should be kept safe. But for our Lord it could not be that he should be lost, but by him the lost were found. So then, through the Son who could not be lost, the servant who was very desirous not to be lost was presented. Lo, mine eyes have seen thy mercy. It is evident Simeon received grace from that child whom he was carrying, for inwardly he received grace from that infant, whom openly he received in his arms. For through him who was glorious, even when he was carried, being small and feeble, he that carried him was made great. But in his Section 49. But inasmuch as Simeon endured to carry on his weak arms that majesty which the creatures could not endure, it is evident that his weakness was made strong by the strength which he carried. For at that time Simeon also, along with all creatures, was secretly upheld by the almighty strength of the Son. Now this is a marvel, that outwardly it was he that was strengthened, that carried him who strengthened him, but inwardly it was the strength that bore its bearer. For the majesty straightened itself, that they who carried it might endure it, in order that as far as that majesty stooped to our littleness, so far should our love be raised up from all desires to reach that majesty.